Yeah, I mean, I don't really need one. I can pretend I'm rolling my feet out. I could have brought balls if I thought about it.
I'm gonna take one home because I read it out in the house. I need lots of at least two. So,
We have these two. You have tennis ball, you have one.
Do you need another one?
well, why don't you
I can try.
just keep it in there? Yeah, and then decide.
Sure, yeah. Do you have a ball? Okay, we have plenty, because we have these. I can use the rocks.
Okay, yeah, we have rocks, we have stuff.
Okay, I'm gonna throw this, because there's the bumpy music next door.
That's where I was first. I was like, oh,
They're like, what is it? They're probably there at 8:30. Okay, let's go around quickly and say names and anything we need to work on today, or pains or aches. I know about some of you and not others of you. I'm Bethany. I'm really tired today, so I'm trying to stay awake to teach class. That's what I'm going to work on. We can go this way.
I'm Suzanne, and I'm just here all the time.
Thank you.
Every Tuesday.
Sandra.
What?
Sandra's on her way.
Oh, she's coming.
Awesome.
I'm Maddie. My knees are giving me some weird stuff today. I'm not sure why. But other than that, okay.
Cool.
Joanne, and what's your job?
Jaw. You can throw that in there, huh? Okay.
I'm sure. Inside problems.
Really?
From my 15-minute calf stretch. So I'm doing something wrong.
I saw
Or I have to
that.
change something. It's not something else.
Okay. Well, this is gonna. Okay. No, this will be good.
I'm Abby. Just general everything.
General everything.
I mean, I felt pretty good, so.
Yay.
And my name is Anu, and you know my issues.
I know.
Baby's too heavy already.
It is too late, and it's only like halfway.
Yeah,
It
it's
is
only
a little
halfway.
rough. Okay, so Sandra, you can filter in whenever. We're gonna start by rolling out feet, and we're gonna go over basic alignment points the whole way through today. So take whatever ball you have, and you're gonna have the object a little bit in front of your body. And the first alignment point we're going to talk about as we roll out feet is outside edges of feet are going to be straight. That's a sad baby. So I think she likes it in here. She was like carrying around the little half domes and standing on them. So when you do outside edges of feet straight, you're aiming to get really from your pinky toe to your heel very parallel. So it often will feel like you're too toed in, because almost all of us from our lifetime in culture and furniture and shoes and everything are walking and standing a bit like this with our toes out. So it's not, and as I'm talking about this alignment point, you can do a couple of things. You can roll. I can't roll because I'm using a rock. I have 2 more balls. Does anyone need a ball? Need a ball. Here. So you can, I like to put it a little bit in front of me and step onto it, because then I feel like I can also get a different motion in my foot, which is what it's for, rolling the foot out. It's to access all the joints in your foot. And you can kind of rock back and forth like I'm doing. You can also move your foot, especially with a ball. You can keep your heel down and move your foot side to side. If I have a ball, like I'm doing like that. And so you guys are starting working on the front of the foot, which is what I usually start with. And so back to this outside edges of feet straight thing. You can move the ball back a little bit so that you're not right on your toes anymore, right under your toes. So when you have your outside edges of your feet straight, we're aiming for something that is ideal alignment for the way that force travels through your body. So we're aiming for the thing that would create the most efficiency of movement coordination and the least wear and tear on your structure over time. The caveat to that is we don't want to do it all the time and force it because our bodies are not habitually like this, right? That's why it feels weird. If you're standing with your outside edges of your feet straight at first, and probably for a while, like I've been doing this for some years, and it still feels odd. It feels more comfortable and it's becoming more natural. But there's a lot of things up the chain that have to balance out for this to actually be what would be more normal for you. Keep moving back your foot, and then we're gonna switch soon. You guys have any questions about this alignment instruction?
You still want heel down?
That's a good question. When your heel is down, you get a little more shaping of your foot around the object that you're rolling on, and it also creates a little more strength. So when your foot, if you're just holding your foot up, you're doing more work in your thigh, and your foot is actually kind of more passive, you know, it's just hanging out on the ball. And if your heel is down, usually you're having to do more work with your foot. So I do like to have the heel down. Switch feet. If you want, actually, as you're switching feet, you can line your outside edge of your foot up on the side of the mat so you can really see what that looks like. If you're not on a mat, you can do it on a floorboard or like a door threshold. That works too.
So do you think of it as coming from your hip, the straight foot?
So that's skipping ahead a little bit, but there should actually be a counter rotation from your hip. So the foot goes straight. If your foot goes straight without the counter rotation, your knees are usually internally rotated, which is why it feels weird. So we're going to get to that in a couple.
Okay.
But if you know how to do that already, which some of you do, you can try to externally rotate your femurs. Like you could try to do that all the time. When you're, practicing movement awareness in class, you could try to do feet straight and femurs externally rotated. But that's a very good question because it's actually an important point, the interplay between what your feet are doing and what your hips are doing. And you probably feel that the bottoms of both feet are very different. How's it going, Sandra? So then since we had this hip question, I want to also address this by talking a little bit about neutral pelvis. Just do one more pass on each foot briefly while I describe this. When you're in neutral pelvis, you are going to have your ASIS points, so just put your hands on your ASIS points, the pointy parts, the front of the pelvis, and then reach your fingers, if you get the heels of your hands there, reach your fingertips down to your pubic symphysis, the meeting between your two pelvic calves. Those points should be vertical when you're in neutral pelvis. So that's a way that you can start informing what the hip is doing while you're also doing the feet. So it's hard to say like, we're just gonna work on this point and then we're gonna work out the body, which is what I'm trying to do, but in reality, once you have a couple of pieces of information, hopefully you start putting them together. Switch your feet, do the other side, and look down and see if the outside edges of the feet are straight while you're doing this. And maybe if you're not sideways to the mirror, turn sideways to the mirror and see if you can look and see, sometimes just by tucking under and shoving your pubic bone forward and then releasing your tail backwards, going back and forth, you can visualize better what your neutral pelvis is. Any other questions before we move on? So now take your hot dome. And so now we're gonna do stepping up. This foot that you're stepping up onto the dome is going to be parallel. Step onto the outside surface of the dome because we're gonna step forward a little bit in a second. But start with your feet. The one on the dome is a little bit in front of the standing foot. And try to get the outside edge of that foot straight. And stay sideways to the mirror. If you need
This outside.
if you need balance help, have your chair beside you.
No, I mean, put your foot on this side.
Okay.
No, no. This
So then look down and try to make this foot outside edge of foot straight.
Yeah, that's good.
And then find your ASIS points again, those little pointy bits on the front of your pelvis. Can you get your pelvis vertical again? So turn my body for you there. So feeling that this is vertical,
On this side.
not too big going forward, not tipped too far forward, you're going to stretch. And then think about your feet being ASIS width apart. So those instructions of having your legs ASIS width apart, that is so that the force of your hip motion is traveling through the center of your joints of your lower body. That's ideal, would be ideal for us. So then if you can step your foot forward a little bit, but try to maintain outside edges of feet straight and legs ASIS width apart and neutral pelvis. So I'm struggling a little bit, so I'm going to back out of it. Like if it starts to feel like a struggle, you may have gone too far to have a beneficial stretch or movement. So then go ahead and switch feet.
Now I'm switching.
So step up with the other foot and first just look down and see is the outside edge of your foot straight. And then look in the mirror and see if your pelvis is neutral. You've got ASIS and cubic symphysis vertical. And then how wide should your legs be?
Hips with ASIS.
Yeah, ASIS width, but pretty much hip width. It's not quite pelvis width, but it's close. And especially if this is something you're just starting doing and you're interested in trying it, do it how it works for you. So if you remember it's hip width, for now that works well. You can get into a lot of detail with this, but if you can also just get sort of a general idea of how something feels and works in your body and work with that, that's going to be very useful as well. And then if you can step forward a little bit, maintaining outside edges of feet straight, ASIS width, and neutral pelvis.
What about your kneecaps? Should they be relaxed?
That's a good question. You guys keep like bringing in the next thing. Yes. So they should be relaxed, and because we talked about that last week. Good. If you, we'll do an exercise in a second to really find how to relax them. But if you're in this position and you can just raise and then relax your kneecaps, let me lift up my hands. So if I do that and then relax it, so it tries to stay relaxed, and you can actually feel it if you step way further forward. You should feel it try to hold you in balance, usually. And like, I get to a point I can't quite relax it there, so if I back off, can I engage and then relax? And don't worry at all if it's something you can't do yet, because sometimes it's really a neurological connection that you don't have, or the quad is holding on because that's what it thinks its job is, and it takes time to sort of peel that back and teach it that that is not its job. Okay, so step away from there for a second and face the mirror, and we're gonna do top of the foot stretch. So you have enough space that you can put the top of your foot behind you, and you're gonna do all the same things we just did. So try to go through your checklist now on your own. That is looking in the mirror and seeing what position should your feet be.
What was the question?
What position should your feet be in while you're stretching?
Outside edges.
Outside edges of feet straight. And then neutral pelvis is harder to see here, but you can try to feel, even if you need to move your pelvis into a tuck and then release it a little bit. Switch feet. So as you do this stretch, you can lessen the stretch if you bring your knee forward. That's totally fine. You can increase the stretch if your leg is further behind you and your knee is straight. So you can have your leg totally behind you and your knee bent or straight, or you can bring it forward if it feels like it's cramping or too much. Try to still have the outside edges of your feet straight, pelvis width, and neutral pelvis. And release that. So go back to sideways to the mirror and try to set up those points now without, we're not doing a thing yet, just set them up for a stance. And let's play with where our weight sits on our feet. So look in the mirror at your body and notice what you see as you go forward and back with your weight. Now, don't look in the mirror and just go forward and back and notice what you feel. So I notice, this for me is better with what I feel. I feel a lot of gripping when I go forward, like my quads, and I feel like I want to tuck under to go forward. And there's also a tendency when you go forward to do more forward head chin jutting. So put your weight back on your heels so that your toes are wiggleable. And try to look now and see is your pelvis still neutral. Now, see what happens if you do a very small hip hinge, letting your weight go back, and then try letting your weight go forward, or really keeping your weight forward. We've done this a few times in this class now to try and experience what is the difference. So, what difference do you guys feel if you do a hip hinge with your weight going back versus with your weight staying forward?
When it's forward, I feel like my quads stand up to try to keep me up.
My toes do a lot of work.
Yeah. Quads work, toes work,
Knees want to bend.
knees want to bend,
And the pelvis wants to talk to you.
the
and
pelvis
you're
wants to
pushing
tuck
it
back forward. Yep. So, mechanically, when you do a hip hinge, if you let your pelvis weight go backwards, you're doing a lot to just simply counterbalance your torso. You're just going in a very basic counterbalance, which makes it easier to find a hip hinge, because when you go and stay forward, it's a whole lot of work to keep yourself from falling over. And the other thing that tends to happen is when you stay forward, there's much earlier a point where you start to round your spine rather than staying flat. So it's like if your weight goes back, you get all of this hip freedom. So that's why that one class we practiced that over and over and over and over. Okay, so now let's take the chair. So you're gonna put the chair at either end of your mat, and first just put your block and your half dome at the end of the chair. Yeah, you're gonna stand in front of the chair. And first just watch in the mirror as you, excuse me, hip hinge. And come down and see if you can put your hands down on the blocks and keep your tail up. We haven't talked about ribs yet, but we're about to. Actually, then I need to do this. Okay, so can you guys watch for a second? You can stay in your stretch, but just look at me. If I do this, am I increasing the range of where my tailbone is able to move? No. Okay, so you guys play with your ribs for a second. You can look in the mirror. Actually, hold on a second. We got to get everybody's weight back. So if I'm like this, is my weight back? No. Okay, so step your feet very close to the chair. And then let your weight drop back. Yes, very good. So it's the same thing here. You just want to have your hands down. So now look in the mirror and thrust your ribs towards the floor and then lift them up. Do that a couple times. Can you keep your ribs lifted? Now look in the mirror, reach one arm by your ear. Does that change your ribs if you reach that arm up? It shouldn't. Try the other arm. Bring it down. And then stand up. So when you are, stand towards me, take your hands and feel your low ribs, press your ribs into your hands. Take a big breath in. And then drop your ribs as you exhale. So do that again. Press your ribs into your hands and feel, maybe turn sideways this time. Look. Breathe in, and then exhale. Drop your ribs. So it shouldn't have to change anything else in your body. Sometimes it does, but it shouldn't have to. So now come back to your chair. And see if you can start the hinge with your hands on your ribs. And this time you're going to put your hands on the back of the chair. So what I want you guys to feel is that, with your hands on the chair, on the back of the chair, there's a tendency to maybe want to rest in that and let your ribs drop through your arms, but I want you to still practice lifting your ribs towards the ceiling and also lifting your tail. You guys feel that? That looks really good. Yeah. Now take and just walk your right hand over towards your left hand, so one side of your ribs is longer. See if you can feel whether your pelvis wants to shift when you do that. I want your pelvis to stay the same if it can. And then walk your hands the other way. So left hand over towards the right. Seeing if your pelvis can stay the same. And can your tail go up towards the ceiling more? Yeah. And then come back to the center. And then unhinge to stand up. So then you're going to take, hinge over to your chair one more time. See if, actually, hold on, sorry, one more instruction. Bring your legs a little wider first. And I'm going to turn this way for a second so you can see the other side of the room. Okay, so if you're hinged forward, see if you can be here on the block or all the way down on the chair without your tail being tucked under. So make sure that your tail is really up. And you can look in the, it's like if you put your hand on your sacrum when you're down there, it should be flat. Your weight should still be back. And you could balance a teapot, excuse me, on your sacrum. So then, and whatever level you have to be, fine, as long as your tail is up. So now you're going to take and move your pelvis straight to one side, as if you're trying to, there was a wall on either side, like you're just trying to bump the wall with your hip, and then straight to the other side. You can also think of making your hips like a typewriter carriage going straight across. And then for a second, imagine you have a tail, a long ponytail, and on your butt, and you're trying to swing it to the side and swing it to the side. So that's one motion you could do, and really try that. So it's like you're kind of side bending at your low spine. So that's one motion. But I want you actually to keep your hips more stable and your spine more stable, and just go to the side and to the side. So that it's less like your tail is making an arc and more like your tail is making a line. Is that making sense? It's just a different motion. Both motions would be useful for certain things. Now, as you're doing this, can you glance in the mirror? I wore the totally wrong shirt for rib alignment. See if your ribs are still lifted. See if your tail is still lifted. And then look, my weight was drifting forward, so I made my weight back. Make sure your toes are easily liftable and your tail is up. And then come out of that, come to standing. How is everyone doing? Okay? Yeah? Good? Okay. Let's come to a seat on our chairs for a moment. Take your half dome and sit on your chair. You can stay sideways. I just want to watch you guys for a second. So on the half dome, this helps you sit more neutral rather than, you can't really sit, it takes actually a lot of work, try that. Try to tuck your tail under, and it actually takes like work if you don't lean against the back of the chair to hold yourself up. So this will propel you towards a more neutral sitting position. You're going to then take one leg, cross your shin over your thigh. And we want to get the shin over the thigh rather than foot, because if you put your foot on, it's going to stretch your ankle. And we want to do right now a hip stretch, not an ankle stretch. So then, think of keeping your ribs dropped and sticking your tail out to hinge your whole body in one piece forward until you get a nice little stretch in the back of your hip. And if you're sideways to the mirror, most of you are, glance in the mirror and see if your spine is rounded. And if you can't tell if your spine is rounded, I can help you. So come back up and watch yourself in the mirror this time. So watch where your spine starts and see if you can really just do this. Just hinge without changing your spine and without tucking your pelvis under. It's very different that way. And it's not really, so also trying to remember that I don't want you guys to get the idea of motions being bad or good, that we're just trying to train the motions that we don't usually do here. And then come back up. You okay on you? Just do a very small. Cross the other shin on the other thigh. And look in the mirror again, see if you can find flat spine, so you're really head on top of tail, and then just hinge that forward so that you're not changing your spinal curves. And sometimes it works to think of sticking your tail out to initiate the movement, because it should be, again, actually a hip hinge. Yes, aligner.
Other times, I go, the bent leg, that's why I force all the weight on that sits bone. And so I just try to change it so I even the weight more, but then, I mess around with this, so am I losing ground?
That's a good question. That was actually part of what I just did to align Madison.
Yeah.
Because there is, switch to the first leg again, I don't want to keep you too long on one side. There could be a tendency to shift your pelvis in any plane, hiking the hip up, tilting the pelvis, or rotating the pelvis. So you can try to feel that your weight stays equal on both sides. And so I think your question is,
Keep all these two.
well, yeah, so your question is if you're trying to keep your weight equal on your sits bones, is it then translating to some other compensation?
It's a different load.
Yeah, and I think, so the thing is, you could do this, I mean, we're trying to do it in a very symmetrically loaded way on both sides. And if you're not able to maintain a flat spine, you might have to do it smaller in order to get your weight equal. You might also have to work on how is your pelvis rotated. So now on the first side, we're actually going to let the spine round a little bit, if this is okay for you. If you have any, like a pregnant belly in the way, or your SI joint feels weird doing this, come back to the beginning version. Reach through your legs and let your spine round a little bit. So it's a different stretch, right? It's not, we want to have different options for what we can do so we can create different motions and do them safely and with awareness of where we are. Come out of that.